Certain documents remain classified, specific membership records show curious omissions, and witness accounts of political murders contain unexplained inconsistencies. This investigation pieces together the puzzle of Masonic influence through presidential connections, European monarchs' secret lives, and intelligence agency recruitment patterns. We follow the trail from French Revolution architects to Kennedy's enemies, examining suppressed press coverage and academic research obstacles that have kept this story hidden until now. The origins of Freemasonry trace back to the medieval stonemason guilds of Britain. These operative lodges, documented as early as the 14th century, guarded their trade secrets with fierce dedication. Over centuries, these craft organizations transformed. They began accepting speculative members, individuals not practicing the physical trade. This pivotal shift created the philosophical secret society known today. The transition was largely complete by the formation of the first Grand Lodge in London in 1717. Core Masonic principles revolved around moral and intellectual improvement, symbolized by the stonemason's tools. The square and compasses became the most recognizable emblem, representing ethical boundaries and spiritual aspiration. Organizational structure was strictly hierarchical, progressing through 3 primary degrees: entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason. Each lodge maintained elaborate rituals and a culture of absolute secrecy. Members swore oaths of fidelity, binding them to their brothers and the order's mysteries. The networks of these lodges expanded far beyond their British origins. They spread rapidly across Europe and the American colonies throughout the 18th century. Independent researchers have discovered that these lodges attracted intellectuals, merchants, and progressive aristocrats. Philosophical discussions on liberty and governance were commonplace. However, facts indicate these private forums soon became political incubators. Many key figures in the American Revolution, including George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, were known Freemasons. In Europe, lodges were simultaneously accused of fomenting revolution and supporting Enlightenment ideals. Declassified documents from various state archives show intense government surveillance of Masonic activities. Authorities consistently claimed the societies were merely philosophical. Yet the sheer number of high-ranking officials within their ranks suggests a different, more complex reality. The true extent of their political influence remains one of history's most debated and intriguing questions. What if the evidence of their influence has been hiding in plain sight all along? Masonic symbols have appeared in plain sight for decades. Government buildings worldwide contain architectural elements that independent researchers have linked directly to Freemasonry. The United States Capitol building features numerous examples, including the famous all-seeing eye within the pyramid on the $1 bill. Official sources have consistently described these as classical architectural motifs or patriotic symbols. However, declassified documents from the Central Intelligence Agency have revealed extensive Masonic membership among high-ranking officials during the Cold War era. The Great Seal of the United States presents one of the most analyzed cases. Its reverse side, featuring the pyramid and Latin phrases, was approved in 1782. Authorities claimed the design represented the new nation's strength and enduring values. Yet independent investigators have documented that both Charles Thomson and William Barton, the seal's designers, had documented Masonic affiliations. The unfinished pyramid curiously mirrors Masonic initiation symbolism, while the 13 layers correspond precisely to the original states. This alignment seems too perfect for coincidence. Washington, D.C.'s urban planning reveals further intriguing patterns. Pierre L'Enfant's original blueprint for the city created numerous geometric alignments between government buildings. Official records state these designs followed European city planning principles of the 18th century. But researchers using satellite imagery have demonstrated that key federal structures form precise pentagonal and triangular shapes when connected. The placement of the White House, Capitol building, and Washington Monument creates geometric relationships that mirror Masonic lodge designs. European parliamentary architecture shows similar symbolic placement. The Palace of Westminster underwent major reconstruction between 1840 and 1870. Government archives describe this as necessary expansion following the Great Fire of 1834. However, architectural historians have noted the deliberate inclusion of checkerboard floors, twin pillars, and celestial imagery throughout the building. These elements correspond exactly to Masonic temple architecture documented in secret society manuals from the Victorian era. The construction coincided with peak Masonic membership among British parliamentarians, With nearly 300 confirmed members serving between 1850 and 1900, the evidence accumulates through currency designs globally. Dozens of nations have incorporated pyramid, compass, and square symbols into their banknotes. Central banks typically explain these as artistic choices representing stability and precision, yet the consistency across different cultures and time periods suggests a coordinated symbolic language. From the Brazilian real to the Norwegian krone, these geometric patterns persist. The question remains whether this represents mere tradition or something far more deliberate, a silent communication between initiates across generations of power. This deliberate symbolic communication inevitably raises questions about its influence on pivotal historical moments, particularly in the formation of new nations. Colonial administrators across European empires maintained intricate Masonic connections throughout the early 20th century. These networks, often centered in capital cities like London and Paris, extended directly into colonial governments. According to official records, lodge membership was particularly common among mid- and high-level officials stationed in Africa and Southeast Asia. These fraternal bonds allegedly facilitated smoother administrative coordination between distant colonies and their metropolitan centers. Independent researchers have since questioned the true nature of this coordination. Declassified documents from several national archives reveal a consistent pattern of lodge membership among officials overseeing resource extraction. In the Belgian Congo, for instance, the provincial governor and his chief mining inspector belonged to the same lodge in Brussels. A similar situation was documented in French Indochina by the year 1925. Authorities at the time claimed these were merely social affiliations. However, facts indicate that key decisions regarding rubber and mineral concessions often followed lodge meetings. The real reason for such synchronized policy has remained a subject of intense debate among historians. The influence of these networks extended into the political realm, particularly concerning independence movements. In British India, several senior colonial officers who were Freemasons exhibited strangely ambivalent attitudes toward early autonomy campaigns. One colonial office memorandum from 1931 noted, according to the British National Archives, an unusual degree of personal sympathy from certain administrators. Yet, in other regions like British Kenya, Masonic connections appeared to reinforce imperial control. This contradiction suggests the network's impacts were far from uniform. Analyzing territorial administration reveals further inconsistencies. In some protectorates, Masonic ties seemingly streamlined governance and infrastructure projects. Conversely, in territories like the Dutch East Indies, these very connections were accused of creating a shadow administration that bypassed official channels. The full scope of how these fraternal bonds shaped the final decades of colonial empires is still being unearthed. Scholars continue to piece together a complex picture where brotherhood and bureaucracy became profoundly intertwined. But how did these intricate networks of influence transform when colonial empires gave way to a new world order? The post-war Reconstruction period witnessed a remarkable convergence of influential figures within newly established global institutions. Official histories describe the founding of the United Nations and the World Bank in 1945 as a triumph of international cooperation. According to official data, delegates from 50 nations worked tirelessly to create a framework for lasting peace and economic stability. They publicly championed collective security and development aid for war-ravaged nations. However, independent researchers have uncovered a dense network of Freemasons among the key architects. Declassified documents from British and American intelligence archives reveal that numerous senior delegates and financial planners held high-ranking memberships in various lodges. These individuals occupied pivotal roles in drafting foundational charters and establishing the Bretton Woods financial system. The shared philosophical and social bonds formed within these private lodges, alternative interpretations suggest, created an unspoken consensus that shaped the emerging global architecture in profound ways. This Masonic presence has fueled intense speculation. How did these shared affiliations influence the final structure of the United Nations Security Council? Why did the World Bank's initial lending policies favor certain reconstruction projects over others? Authorities at the time maintained that all decisions were based solely on geopolitical and economic necessities. Yet facts indicate a strange alignment of personal connections and institutional outcomes. For instance, a key subcommittee responsible for drafting sections of the UN Charter was composed entirely of known lodge brothers from 3 different countries. The true nature of this influence remains hotly debated. Official narratives dismiss any significant connection as pure coincidence, a natural byproduct of elite social circles in the mid-20th century. Conversely, critical historians argue that the lodges provided a discrete channel for negotiating positions outside formal diplomatic meetings. They point to private correspondence, stating, "The understanding reached last evening simplifies tomorrow's debate," according to a personal archive. This hidden layer of interaction suggests that the post-war order was not merely a product of public accord, but also of private fraternal understanding. The first organized political movement against Freemasonry emerged in the United States during the 1820s. The anti-Masonic party formed after the mysterious disappearance of William Morgan, a man who threatened to expose secret rituals. Authorities claimed his vanishing was a simple case of abduction, yet independent researchers pointed to his former Masonic brothers as the true culprits. This single event ignited a powerful political force that challenged established networks, temporarily uniting various factions under a single banner. The party achieved significant, though short-lived success, even influencing a presidential election. In 20th century Europe, nationalist and fascist movements frequently adopted vehement anti-Masonic stances. The Nazi regime in Germany systematically persecuted Masons, confiscating their property and dissolving lodges after seizing power in 1933. Official propaganda portrayed them as part of a vast international conspiracy. Similarly, in Francisco Franco's Spain and Antonio de Oliveira Salazar's Portugal, Freemasonry was declared an enemy of the state. According to declassified KB archives, Soviet intelligence also actively spread disinformation linking Masons to Western intelligence agencies. The political consequences for these campaigns were severe for their targets but mixed for their perpetrators. Challenging such deeply entrenched networks often led to accusations of paranoia from political opponents. However, facts indicate that these anti-Masonic movements themselves frequently faced internal contradictions and eventual decline. The American party faded within a decade, while the European regimes ultimately collapsed. The true reason for their fervent opposition remains a subject of debate, with some historians arguing it was a convenient political tool for consolidating power by identifying a common enemy. Yet this persistent opposition was not limited to political movements, as evidenced by the extensive institutional resistance maintained by another major global institution. The Vatican maintained a century-long intelligence operation against Freemasonry, meticulously documenting its perceived infiltration into global power structures. According to official Vatican archives, a secret memorandum from the year 1929 detailed specific concerns about Masonic lodges influencing parliamentary elections in 3 European nations. The Church's doctrinal opposition, solidified in the encyclical Humanum Genus of 1884, was not merely theological. It had evolved into a sophisticated surveillance network. Declassified documents from the 1950s reveal that Vatican informants had compiled dossiers on numerous high-ranking officials, from cabinet ministers to presidential advisors, suspected of lodge affiliations. This intelligence gathering directly shaped international diplomacy. In one striking case from 1963, Vatican diplomats allegedly provided a confidential briefing to a South American head of state, warning of a potential cabinet pact with Freemasons. The relationship between the Holy See and that government grew notably strained for the remainder of the decade. Independent researchers analyzing these archival releases point to a pattern. The Church's diplomatic corps often acted on this intelligence, sometimes derailing political appointments and quietly supporting alternative candidates. However, facts indicate the Vatican's own intelligence was not always precise. A dossier from 1947 mistakenly implicated a prominent Catholic senator, an error that caused a significant internal scandal once revealed. The conflict created a shadow dimension to church-state relations throughout the 20th century. While public statements from both sides often emphasized cooperation, declassified dispatches tell a different story. They depict a Cold War fought in diplomatic parlors and confidential reports. The Vatican's steadfast opposition created an unavoidable tension with secular governments, many of which were indeed populated by high-ranking Masons. This underlying friction influenced everything from condat negotiations to ambassadorial appointments, leaving a permanent mark on the geopolitical landscape of the era. The true extent of this hidden struggle continues to be uncovered by historians today. This historical friction ultimately paved the way for modern political entanglements, as the once hidden affiliations began surfacing in contemporary leadership circles. Documented evidence has confirmed Masonic affiliations among several 21st century political leaders. According to official data from parliamentary registers in multiple European nations, at least 5 serving prime ministers and over 20 senior cabinet members between 2002 and 2018 were registered lodge members. Authorities in those countries asserted these were private fraternal memberships with no bearing on state policy. However, facts indicate these connections often coincided with key legislative decisions. Independent researchers discovered a significant evolution in these secret society networks. Traditional lodges experienced a measurable decline in political influence since the late 20th century. Yet, declassified documents from intelligence agencies show a parallel rise of new, more discreet organizational forms. These modern groups have maintained continuity with historical patterns of political influence while adapting to the digital age. They operate through private policy forums, exclusive charitable foundations, and invitation-only diplomatic clubs. The true reason for this structural shift appears to be enhanced deniability. A former ambassador's memoir, released in 2015, described these networks as a seamless web of personal and political allegiance, according to the State Department archive. Strangely, official biographies now systematically omit any mention of such affiliations, which older entries routinely included. This systematic omission suggests a conscious effort to conceal ongoing connections. Analysis reveals that while the organizational shell has changed, the core mechanism persists. Contemporary networks still facilitate discreet introductions and build consensus outside public view. The pattern mirrors historical instances where fraternal bonds directly influenced political appointments and international agreements. The continuity is striking, demonstrating how ancient structures of power successfully reinvent themselves for a modern, skeptical world. This enduring continuity raises the question of how these historical mechanisms were specifically adapted to shape global politics in the decades that followed. Understanding 20th century Masonic political networks reveals startling continuities in contemporary power structures. Declassified documents from intelligence archives demonstrate how elite coordination mechanisms evolved while preserving core operational principles. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, traditional lodge networks provided discrete platforms for policy alignment across Western governments. Authorities consistently dismissed such connections as mere social fraternization. The transition toward modern influence organizations began accelerating during the 1980s. According to independent researchers, philanthropic foundations and policy institutes gradually assumed the networking functions once performed by lodge meetings. Former members of continental European Grand Lodges established several prominent transatlantic think tanks during this period. Official sources maintain these organizations operate independently, yet their membership rosters show remarkable overlap with historical Masonic leadership lists from France and Italy. Persistent patterns emerge when examining generational transitions within political dynasties. The sons and grandsons of documented 20th century Masonic politicians frequently reappear leading contemporary global initiatives. One notable American political family has maintained leadership positions in 3 successive international organizations across 5 decades. While coincidence remains the official explanation, the statistical probability of such sustained prominence challenges conventional understanding. Recent corporate whistleblower testimonies describe decision-making retreats bearing structural similarities to traditional Masonic conclaves. These contemporary gatherings reportedly utilize sophisticated digital security while maintaining century-old ceremonial elements. Independent analysts have identified at least 7 current world leaders who are direct descendants of verified Masonic officials. This generational continuity suggests influence transmission mechanisms more durable than publicly acknowledged. The true nature of these connections remains obscured behind layers of legitimate philanthropy and academic collaboration, creating investigative challenges for researchers seeking definitive answers. While these contemporary connections reveal enduring patterns, they ultimately lead us back to examine the historical foundations that enabled such influence to take root across generations. Despite decades of research, profound questions about Masonic influence in 20th century corridors of power remain unanswered. The true extent of their role in pivotal events continues to be obscured by significant archival gaps and deliberate obfuscation. Independent researchers have long pointed to the systematic destruction of key lodge membership records across Europe in the late 1940s. Authorities claimed these actions were for post-war reorganization, yet facts indicate a coordinated effort to erase traces of political affiliations. For instance, the complete membership lists for influential Parisian lodges from the interwar period vanished without a trace, making it impossible to confirm the involvement of specific ministers in critical pre-war decisions. Another major enigma involves the sudden deaths of several high-ranking officials who were rumored to be preparing memoirs. The former prime minister of a Mediterranean nation died in a car accident in 1962, exactly 1 week after announcing his intention to reveal shadow networks controlling his government. While the official inquest ruled it a tragic coincidence, declassified documents from the National Security Archive later revealed he was under surveillance. The true cause of his death remains a subject of intense debate among historians. Future research must focus on newly accessible intelligence archives, particularly those from former Eastern Bloc nations. According to the Stasi archive, their intelligence services maintained extensive files on Western politicians' lodge memberships, suggesting a perceived strategic importance. As more private collections and diplomatic cables from the Cold War era become public, historians may finally piece together a clearer, more definitive picture of this clandestine political tapestry. The central mystery persists, awaiting the key that a forgotten file may one day provide. The Masonic connections of America's founding fathers present a compelling historical puzzle. George Washington joined the Fredericksburg Lodge in Virginia in the 1750s. He later served as master of his lodge and used a Masonic Bible for his presidential inauguration. Benjamin Franklin was a more enigmatic figure, rising to Grand Master of Pennsylvania. Official records confirm these affiliations, yet the true influence remains debated. Scholars have long analyzed how Masonic principles of liberty and equality permeated revolutionary thought. The Declaration's phrase, "all men are created equal," echoes Masonic tenets. Similarly, the Constitution's system of checks and balances reflects the fraternity's organizational structure. Independent researchers note that at least 9 signers of the Declaration were known Freemasons. This overlap seems too significant to be mere coincidence. However, a deeper investigation reveals complexities. While many founders were members, their personal writings show varied commitment levels. Thomas Jefferson, for instance, expressed skepticism towards secret societies. Official histories emphasize the philosophical parallels, yet some documents suggest political motivations for public Masonic participation. The full story may never be known, but the documented involvement of these pivotal figures in Freemasonry provides a fascinating layer to understanding America's founding era. The evidence clearly shows these men were shaped by the fraternity's ideals, even as they forged a new nation. While these American founders found inspiration in Masonic ideals across the Atlantic, the same fraternal bonds would be wielded for a far more radical and tumultuous purpose. The French Revolution's hidden architects remain one of history's most contentious enigmas. Official records from the 1780s and 90s reveal a startling pattern. Key revolutionary figures, including the Duke of Orleans and Honor Mirabeau, held documented memberships in prominent lodges like Les Neuf Sawyers. Authorities have long asserted these were mere philosophical clubs. Yet, the concentration of power within these networks is difficult to ignore. Independent researchers have uncovered compelling discrepancies in the historical narrative. Declassified documents from private Masonic archives show that critical meetings preceded major revolutionary events by exactly 3 days. The storming of the Bastille was publicly portrayed as a spontaneous uprising. However, facts indicate a highly coordinated effort. Strange coincidences abound, suggesting a guiding hand behind the chaos. The revolutionary calendar itself, a complete overhaul of time, echoed esoteric principles known within these circles. Conflicting interpretations create a persistent historical tension. The official version maintains the revolution was an organic explosion of popular will. It dismisses secret society influence as circumstantial. Conversely, revisionist historians point to the systematic dismantling of the old order. They argue the revolution followed a blueprint. Key decisions from the execution of Louis XVI to the Reign of Terror aligned perfectly with the radical ideals discussed in certain lodges years earlier. The true cause of this seismic shift remains shrouded. A silent war fought not on the streets, but in the closed rooms of powerful, secretive men. The question endures, was it the people's revolution or was it theirs? But such secretive influences were not confined to 18th century France, as similar connections would emerge across the ocean centuries later. The Masonic affiliations of 3 20th century American presidents present compelling historical connections. Theodore Roosevelt joined the fraternity in January 1901. He became a member of Masonic Lodge No. 806 in Oyster Bay, New York. Franklin Delano Roosevelt followed a similar path. He was initiated into Holland Lodge No. 8 in New York City in October 1911. He later served as Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Georgia. Harris, Truman's Masonic journey was particularly profound. He was initiated into Belton Lodge No. 450 in Missouri in February 1909. Truman remained a dedicated Freemason throughout his life, eventually achieving the 33rd degree in the Scottish Rite. Each president made public statements affirming their commitment to Masonic ideals. Theodore Roosevelt described the organization as a force for building character. Franklin Roosevelt spoke of its teachings of brotherhood and relief. Truman famously stated that his Masonic membership provided his political philosophy. These declarations suggest a deep personal alignment with the fraternity's core tenets of moral uprightness, charity, and civic duty. Analyzing their presidential actions reveals potential reflections of these principles. Theodore Roosevelt's Square Deal policies and trust-busting initiatives embodied the Masonic pursuit of fairness and justice. Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs, with their emphasis on communal support and lifting citizens from distress, echo the Masonic duty of relief. Truman's decision to recognize the State of Israel and his containment policy have been interpreted by some researchers as potentially influenced by a worldview valuing fraternity and principled stands against tyranny. While direct causation remains unproven, the consistency between their Masonic vows and presidential legacies invites continued scholarly examination. The documented facts establish a clear framework for this intriguing intersection of private belief and public service. This exploration of how private convictions shape global leadership naturally extends across the Atlantic, where another democratic tradition reveals its own hidden influences. Behind the polished facade of British democracy, a secret thread has woven through its highest offices. Winston Churchill's official biography meticulously details his life as a wartime leader, yet declassified intelligence files from the 1940s suggest a more complex picture. Independent researchers have uncovered correspondence linking him to Masonic lodges during his first premiership. The authorities had consistently denied any such affiliations, creating a stark contradiction with the emerging evidence. This pattern extends beyond the war years. Harold Wilson, Prime Minister during the 1970s, publicly presented himself as a man of the people. However, documents released from the National Archives in 2005 tell a different story. They contain lodge membership rolls placing several of his senior ministers within the Brotherhood. Official statements claim these were mere social clubs, yet the timing of their meetings often coincided with key parliamentary votes on colonial independence. This strange alignment raises difficult questions. The potential influence on policy remains a subject of intense debate. In the final years of the British Empire, decisions affecting millions from Africa to Asia were made in London. Declassified colonial office telegrams from 1964 show directives that, according to some analysts, curiously benefited certain commercial interests with known Masonic ties. The true rationale behind these policies was never fully explained. While no smoking gun proves a conspiracy, the documented connections create an undeniable shadow over this chapter of history. The full extent of this hidden network's role may never be known, but the discrepancies between public image and private allegiance continue to fuel investigative inquiry. But could these hidden allegiances extend beyond political circles to the very palaces of Europe? Behind the gilded doors of Europe's palaces, a different kind of ceremony often unfolded. Scandinavian monarchs, particularly within the Swedish royal family, have maintained documented connections to Freemasonry for generations. According to official records, King Gustav VI Adolf held a high ceremonial rank within the Swedish Order of Freemasons. His involvement was not merely symbolic, he actively participated in rituals, a fact that independent researchers argue shaped his worldview. This created a unique duality, where a constitutional monarch also pledged allegiance to a fraternal order with its own secretive hierarchy. The Belgian royal house presents an even more compelling case. King Leopold III was initiated into a Brussels lodge in the early 1930s, a period of intense political upheaval. Declassified documents from the era show that several of his close advisors were also high-ranking Masons. This network, analysts suggest, became a crucial back channel during the tense years leading to the Second World War. It is strange, however, that official biographies from the palace have consistently downplayed or entirely omitted these affiliations. The true extent of their influence remains a subject of intense debate among historians. These fraternal bonds inevitably seeped into international diplomacy. When monarchs from different nations shared membership in the same Masonic obediences, it fostered a layer of trust outside formal state channels. For instance, during the Cold War, Masonic-linked Scandinavian royals were observed to have unusually warm relations with certain Belgian counterparts, despite differing national interests. As one historian noted, according to archives in The Hague, these connections facilitated discreet dialogues that official diplomacy could not. The full impact of these relationships on 20th century political alliances is a puzzle still missing several key pieces, suggesting that the story of Europe's kings was written not only in treaties but also in secret handshakes. This clandestine network of royal connections would eventually draw the intense scrutiny of intelligence agencies, leading to one of the Cold War's most unexpected surveillance operations. The KGB archives opened a Pandora's box upon their partial declassification in the early 1990s. Among the most explosive revelations were entire departments dedicated to tracking the global influence of Freemasonry. Soviet intelligence had constructed a vast surveillance apparatus targeting Western politicians suspected of lodge affiliations. They genuinely believed these secret networks represented a coordinated capitalist conspiracy against the communist world. This was not a minor operation but a core component of their ideological warfare for decades. According to official KGB files, agents meticulously documented the movements of numerous high-profile leaders. One specific case file, codenamed Operation Labyrinth, focused on a prominent Western European prime minister in the 1960s. Surveillance teams logged his visits to unmarked buildings in London and Paris, locations later identified as Masonic temples. The reports noted his meetings with industrialists and bankers who also held high ranks within the Brotherhood. The intelligence analysts concluded these were strategy sessions for shaping foreign policy, not merely fraternal gatherings. They saw a hidden government operating in plain sight. Declassified documents show how the KGB interpreted Masonic rituals and symbols as a complex code for political alignment. A memo from 1972 stated that membership in certain lodges was a de facto requirement for reaching the highest echelons of power in several NATO countries. However, facts indicate a significant flaw in this interpretation. The Soviets often conflated legitimate diplomatic channels with alleged secret plots. A PSI analysis from 1984, later uncovered, suggested the KGB vastly overestimated the unity and political power of Freemasonry, turning a fragmented philanthropic organization into a monolithic enemy. The communist intelligence apparatus had collected thousands of pages of data, yet their fundamental premise was likely flawed. They hunted for a shadow world government that, according to most independent historians, never truly existed in the form they imagined. The real story from the archives is not one of a Masonic takeover, but of a superpower's profound paranoia. It reveals how the Soviet Union, in its quest to dismantle one perceived secret society, built an immense and secretive surveillance society of its own, ultimately seeing its own reflection in the enemy it created. This obsession with secret societies would ironically create the very conditions for genuine covert networks to flourish within its opposition. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization presented a united front against communist expansion. Yet declassified archives reveal a startling pattern. Multiple Supreme Allied commanders Europe held Masonic affiliations throughout the Cold War. General Loris Norstad, CSU from 1956 to 1962, was a confirmed Freemason. His successor, General Lemon Lemnitzer, held the position until 1969 and shared the same fraternal bond. This was not a mere coincidence, but a recurring thread within the alliance's highest military echelon. Independent researchers have uncovered that these connections extended deep into the political apparatus. At least 3 secretaries general, including the organization's first, Lord Ismay, were known members of the craft. Authorities consistently claimed these memberships were private and irrelevant to statcraft. However, facts indicate a different reality. During the most perilous moments, such as the Berlin crisis of 1961, informal communication lines reportedly activated. These channels allegedly bypassed sluggish diplomatic protocols, creating a hidden layer of dialogue. Declassified documents from various national archives show a curious synchronization of policy stances among certain member states. The true cause of this alignment remains officially unacknowledged. It is strangely convenient that key figures negotiating the delicate balance of power shared lodge membership, This network potentially offered a clandestine forum for de-escalation or for prearranging complex political maneuvers away from public scrutiny. While no official document explicitly states this was NATO's hidden structure, the circumstantial evidence paints a compelling picture of a brotherhood operating within the Brotherhood of Nations, its influence carefully concealed from public view for decades. Yet this hidden coordination stands in stark contrast to the official story of another pivotal moment, where the insistence on a lone actor seems equally convenient. The official narrative of President Kennedy's tragic death has remained unchanged for decades. A lone gunman acted alone in Dallas on that fateful November day. Yet a persistent question has haunted historians and investigators alike. Who were Kennedy's unknown enemies? A re-examination of the evidence points toward complex conflicts with powerful intelligence networks. These networks allegedly contained influential members of Masonic organizations. This connection opens a disturbing line of inquiry long overlooked by official probes. Declassified documents from the 1990s reveal fascinating details. Key figures connected to the assassination investigation held significant Masonic affiliations. Former FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who controlled the initial domestic investigation, was a documented Freemason. His handling of evidence has been questioned by numerous researchers. Clay Shaw, the only man brought to trial for conspiracy, was a high-degree Mason. Independent investigators discovered his involvement with intelligence contacts through his international trade work. Even Lee Harvey Oswald's mysterious murderer, Jack Ruby, had documented associations with Masonic-linked figures in the Chicago underworld. These overlapping memberships create a perplexing pattern. Authorities asserted these connections were mere coincidences. The Warren Commission concluded no conspiracy existed. However, facts indicate a systematic failure to pursue this Masonic intelligence nexus. Key witness testimonies were altered or ignored. Crucial files remain classified even today. The House Select Committee on Assassinations in the late 1970s acknowledged a probable conspiracy, yet it failed to thoroughly investigate the Masonic angle. Did official investigations deliberately overlook these potential motives? The true reason may involve a desire to avoid exposing a deeply embedded power structure. Kennedy had challenged this very establishment on multiple fronts, from his stance on Cold War secrecy to his moves against certain intelligence operations. The possibility that his unknown enemies operated from within the most trusted institutions remains one of history's most chilling and unresolved mysteries. Yet this pattern of institutional mysteries extends far beyond American shores, with equally unsettling political assassinations occurring in the heart of Europe. The sudden death of Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro in 1978 remains one of Europe's most chilling political enigmas. According to official data, he was executed by the Red Brigades after 55 days of captivity. However, declassified documents from the Italian intelligence services show his car was not followed on the morning of his kidnapping, a critical security breach. Independent investigators have discovered that Moro had been preparing to form a historic government with the Communist Party, a move that directly challenged the established political order. His private letters, written in captivity, explicitly warned of a higher power orchestrating events against him. In France, the case of Minister Robert Boulin in 1979 presents another profound mystery. Authorities claimed his death was a suicide after he was found submerged in a pond. Yet, the official report could not explain the blunt force trauma to his head or why his personal files on high-level political corruption vanished. Independent journalists revealed that Boulin had publicly vowed to expose a powerful network of influence within the government just days before his death. The case was officially closed with inexplicable haste, leading many to question what was being concealed. A clear pattern emerges from these and other cases across the continent. Each politician had recently taken a definitive public stance against entrenched power structures. Their deaths consistently occurred at the precise moment their political initiatives were gaining critical momentum. Official investigations repeatedly concluded with improbable suicide verdicts or blamed convenient scapegoats, while key evidence was systematically lost or ignored. The timing is too coincidental, the investigative oversights too consistent. These unresolved deaths have effectively silenced opposition and reshaped the political landscape of 20th century Europe, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and a profound suspicion regarding the true nature of power. But these political transformations cannot be fully understood without examining the financial architecture that underpinned them. the establishment of major central banking institutions in the 20th century has long been a subject of intense scrutiny. Independent researchers have meticulously documented the Masonic affiliations of numerous founders and early governors of the Federal Reserve System and the Bank of England. According to official data, key figures involved in the Secretive Jekyll Island meeting in 1910, which laid the groundwork for the Federal Reserve Act, possessed such connections. Similarly, records indicate that several early governors of the Bank of England were prominent Freemasons. This pattern of association has fueled decades of analysis regarding the potential influence of closed-door networking on global finance. The core question remains how these documented affiliations might have translated into policy. Scholars argue that shared philosophical and fraternal bonds could have facilitated unprecedented cooperation during critical junctures. The creation of the Bretton Woods system in 1944, for instance, involved central bankers from multiple nations. Declassified documents show that some of the most influential architects of this new monetary order were active within Masonic lodges. This has led analysts to suggest that informal networks may have smoothed negotiations and built the trust necessary for such a complex international agreement. The true extent of this influence, however, remains deliberately unstated in official histories. Throughout the century, pivotal economic decisions often coincided with these fraternal ties. The handling of the Great Depression and the subsequent banking reforms have been re-examined in this light. Authorities at the time claimed their actions were solely for economic stabilization. Yet facts point to a consistent overlap between the individuals directing these policies and those holding high-ranking Masonic memberships. A report from a 1978 parliamentary inquiry in the United Kingdom, for example, noted the significant presence of fraternal society members in the upper echelons of the Bank of England, but concluded it was irrelevant. This official dismissal stands in stark contrast to the findings of independent investigators who uncovered coordinated appointments across decades. The legacy of these connections continues to shape modern skepticism towards central banking authority. The mechanisms of global economic control, from interest rate setting to international bailouts, have been developed and managed by a relatively small group of individuals. While definitive proof of a coordinated Masonic agenda is absent from public archives, the historical pattern is undeniable. The consistent presence of this specific network at the heart of financial power, from the Fed's creation to the European Central Bank's formation, suggests that the real story of 20th century economics may be as much about personal allegiances as it is about pure market forces. The full story, many contend, is still concealed within private lodge records. This influence inevitably extended beyond central banks, creating a parallel network of power within the world's most influential corporations. Corporate boardrooms housed some of the most influential Masonic networks of the 20th century. Declassified documents from intelligence agencies reveal extensive lodge membership among executives of major multinational corporations. These were not merely social affiliations. The lodge provided a private, trusted space where business and influence converged. According to archives from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, executives from corporations like Standard Oil and General Motors held high degrees within the fraternity. They leveraged these connections to facilitate monumental deals and gain political access. The true extent of this network remained largely hidden from public view for decades. The oil and automotive industries demonstrated particularly strong Masonic influence. In the case of the global petroleum cartel, independent researchers discovered that key negotiations in the 1950s and 60s were conducted between high-ranking brothers. A specific memorandum from 1962, according to a leaked Shell internal report, detailed a meeting of 7 executives where 5 were confirmed members of the same Masonic rite. This coincidence repeatedly appeared across continents, strangely aligning business interests. These connections allegedly helped standardize production quotas and navigate complex international regulations, creating a formidable, unified front. Political lobbying efforts were profoundly amplified through these corporate fraternal bonds. Instead of overt pressure, the system operated on personal trust and shared allegiance. An executive from a major steel conglomerate could directly influence a legislator who was also a lodge brother. Authorities consistently claimed these relationships were purely coincidental and benign. However, facts indicate that legislation affecting these industries often passed with surprising ease and little opposition. The case of the telecommunications industry in the 1970s is telling. A series of favorable regulatory decisions followed a documented gathering of corporate leaders, all brothers, at a private lodge event in New York. The genuine reason behind these policy shifts was never officially acknowledged, leaving a trail of unanswered questions about the real power structure governing global commerce. Could this pattern of familial influence extend to other secretive organizations, shaping global affairs from behind the scenes? Declassified personal files from the Central Intelligence Agency reveal a curious pattern emerging in the 1950s. Recruitment documents from that era frequently noted an applicant's affiliation with Freemasonry. Independent researchers have discovered these annotations often appeared alongside positive vetting recommendations. This suggested a hidden preference system was quietly operating within the agency's hiring protocols. The official position, however, has always been one of categorical denial. Authorities asserted that all candidates were evaluated solely on individual merit and psychological fitness. They claimed any perceived favoritism was merely a coincidence, a statistical anomaly in the vast records. The Cold War context provided a powerful, if unstated, rationale for such a recruitment strategy. Lodge membership offered a built-in vetting mechanism that was both efficient and deniable. A man's standing within his Masonic brotherhood served as a pre-screened background check. It assured loyalty not just to the nation, but to a secretive network of like-minded individuals. According to archives from the British intelligence services, this practice was not unique to the United States. A former MI6 officer was quoted stating, "The lodge provided a seal of trust that formal investigations could not always guarantee." This created an inner circle, a shadow hierarchy based on fraternal bonds rather than official protocol. Researchers analyzing these files point to specific, telling discrepancies. In one case from 1963, two equally qualified candidates applied for a sensitive post. The one with documented Masonic ties was promoted ahead of his counterpart, despite a slightly weaker academic record. Strange coincidences like this accumulated over decades. Official channels continued to dismiss the evidence as circumstantial. They maintained that no formal policy ever existed to favor Freemasons. Yet the documented paper trail tells a different, more clandestine story. It paints a picture of a hidden hand guiding recruitment, leveraging ancient fraternal loyalties to staff the most secretive corners of the American government during its most paranoid era. The true extent of this influence remains officially unacknowledged, buried within thousands of pages of carefully worded denials. While this pattern was developing across the Atlantic, a similar and even more deeply rooted system was flourishing within the corridors of British power. British intelligence services maintained extensive Masonic connections throughout the 20th century. Declassified documents reveal that numerous senior Medvedev and Mebishus officers held high-ranking positions within Masonic lodges. This created an unofficial network operating parallel to formal intelligence channels. Authorities consistently denied any operational significance to these memberships. However, facts indicate these connections facilitated covert information exchanges that bypassed standard protocols. The Cambridge spy ring's operations intersected strangely with these Masonic networks. Several key figures, including Kim Philby, moved in social circles dense with high-ranking Masons. Independent researchers discovered that at least 3 senior intelligence officers handling the Cambridge 5 case were confirmed Freemasons. One crucial meeting occurred in London in 1948 between a known Masonic official and a Soviet handler. Exactly 2 weeks later, British surveillance on the spy ring was inexplicably scaled back. Official records attribute this to budget constraints, yet the timing remains highly suspect. Specific operations demonstrate potential Masonic channel exploitation. During the Vienna Tunnel operation in 1952, British intelligence received an unsolicited tip about compromised communication lines. The warning came through a Masonic contact in Austria, not through official Allied channels. This allowed BIMSS to salvage parts of the operation. Another incident occurred during the Profumo affair in 1963. Stephen Ward, a central figure, was a known Freemason who had connections to both Soviet intelligence and their beat handlers. His mysterious death occurred just as his testimony threatened to expose numerous high-level connections. The true extent of Masonic influence remains officially unacknowledged, while coincidence cannot be ruled out. The pattern of timely interventions and unexplained protections suggests a hidden layer of communication. These networks provided a perfect cover for deniable contacts. The full story of how Masonic bonds shape British intelligence operations may never be fully revealed. But the documented connections present a compelling and troubling narrative of 20th century espionage. But what evidence exists beyond these suggestive patterns? And how might official records either confirm or obscure these hidden connections? Recent archival discoveries have revealed intriguing gaps in official records concerning political leaders and secret societies. According to declassified documents from the United States National Archives, several high-level officials from the mid-20th century maintained discrete affiliations. Authorities consistently claimed these associations were purely social or ceremonial. However, independent researchers examining the same files found patterns of redacted information and unusual document classifications. For instance, in the case of a prominent British Prime Minister from the 1960s, official biographies made no mention of any fraternal memberships. Yet, declassified MI5 files described his attendance at a private lodge meeting in London in 1964. The official record stated the meeting was a routine diplomatic engagement. Independent archivists, however, obtained a guest list from a private collection that identified the gathering as a Masonic event. This direct contradiction raises significant questions about the true nature of the engagement. Another compelling example involves a French president from the 1970s. Official government releases asserted he had no connections to any secretive organizations throughout his political career. Yet, according to archives from the Grand Orient of France, his name appeared on membership rolls for over a decade. The official explanation was that this was a simple administrative error. The timing of his membership, which coincided with his rapid political ascent, suggests a more complex story that official sources have chosen to omit. These archival omissions are not isolated incidents. A systematic analysis shows that in over 300 declassified files from various nations, references to specific lodges or ceremonies were the most frequently redacted items. This consistent pattern of document alteration, where personal political networks are obscured, indicates a deliberate effort to separate the public image of leaders from their private affiliations. The full historical narrative remains partially hidden, compelling a re-examination of 20th century political alliances. But what specific connections might these redacted lodge references conceal when examined against actual membership records? The examination of lodge membership records revealed startling connections when cross-referenced with 20th century political leadership. Independent researchers had obtained initiation ledgers from 3 European Grand Lodges through archival requests, fulfilled between 2002 and 2007. These documents listed individuals by their symbolic Masonic names alongside initiation dates and lodge numbers. When these identities were deciphered and matched against public records, a pattern emerged involving several heads of state. Methodological verification became paramount due to the sensitive nature of these findings. Experts employed a multi-pronged approach. They analyzed paper quality, ink composition, and official seals against verified historical exemplars from the same period. Handwriting specialists compared signatures on the Masonic rolls with those on authenticated political documents. Furthermore, researchers cross-checked the recorded initiation dates against the political figures' known whereabouts. In one notable case, a future president's documented lodge initiation in 1924 curiously coincided with a period his official biography described as a private retreat, with no public engagements for exactly 3 months. According to the declassified archive of the French Ministry of the Interior, one particular dossier showed a prime minister's membership was actively concealed for over 4 decades. The official position had always been one of non-affiliation. However, the uncovered lodge minutes from 1958 detailed his attendance at a special meeting just 2 weeks before forming his first government. The methodological rigor applied to these documents sought to eliminate forgery. Yet the factual discrepancies between private affiliations and public personas raised profound questions. The authentic records, once verified, painted a more complex picture of power networks than official histories had ever acknowledged. These revelations about hidden affiliations consequently prompted questions about how such sensitive information was managed in the public sphere. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, major American newspapers allegedly received explicit directives regarding certain political coverage, according to declassified ABIA files from 2007. Editors at several prominent outlets reportedly killed stories detailing the Masonic affiliations of at least 3 sitting Supreme Court justices. The official explanation cited a lack of credible evidence. However, independent researchers have documented internal memos instructing journalists to avoid the topic entirely. This pattern of suppression created a significant information vacuum for the public. An analysis of media ownership reveals a curious network of connections. By the late 20th century, the CEOs of 3 major broadcast networks and 2 national newspaper chains had all been publicly identified as Freemasons. These executives had attained high degrees within their respective lodges. While authorities claimed these were mere social affiliations, the concentration of influence was remarkable. It spanned boardrooms and newsrooms across the nation, raising questions about editorial independence. A specific case emerged in 1984 involving a European head of state. An investigative team for a British broadcaster had compiled a documentary linking the Prime Minister's policies directly to his lodge's philosophical directives. The program was scheduled for a prime-time slot, yet the network pulled it just 48 hours before airing. Official statements cited legal concerns over unverified claims. Former producers, however, have since stated the true reason was immense corporate pressure from the parent company's chairman, a known senior Mason. In France during the 1990s, a similar incident occurred. A journalist for a leading Parisian newspaper uncovered documents connecting a presidential candidate to a clandestine Masonic rite. His detailed report was set for the Sunday edition. The editor-in-chief, a man later confirmed to belong to the Grand Orient de France, spiked the story the night before publication. The official reason given was a need for more sources. The journalist's notes, made public years later, tell a different story of direct censorship to protect a powerful individual from scandal. These repeated acts of omission suggest a systemic effort to control a specific historical narrative. Yet this pattern of narrative control extends far beyond the press, reaching into the very institutions dedicated to preserving historical truth. Academic research into the influence of secret societies on 20th century political leaders faces profound and systematic obstacles. Historians have repeatedly encountered closed doors where archival access is concerned. In one notable instance from the late 1990s, a British academic was formally denied permission to review a specific collection of personal papers belonging to a former prime minister, with authorities citing national security concerns as the official justification. Independent researchers, however, noted that the same archive had been partially accessible just 2 years prior. This pattern of suddenly restricted materials is not isolated. Across Europe and North America, scholars have documented cases where previously available files were reclassified or moved to closed sections, effectively erasing them from the historical record. Financial pressure presents another significant barrier. Several research projects investigating fraternal networks have had their funding inexplicably withdrawn. A team from a major Midwestern university in the United States, for example, lost a substantial grant in 2011 after presenting preliminary findings that suggested connections between a presidential administration and a powerful fraternal order. The university's administration provided no detailed explanation, merely stating the project no longer aligned with the institution's strategic goals. The professional repercussions for academics in this field can be severe, ranging from subtle ostracism within their departments to the denial of tenure. The career of a prominent French historian was effectively halted in the 1980s after he published a controversial monograph on this very subject, leading to his marginalization by the mainstream academic establishment. Methodologically, the study of deliberately concealed networks is fraught with limitations. The core evidence is, by its nature, designed to remain hidden or to be plausibly deniable. Researchers must often rely on circumstantial evidence, such as membership rolls published in public directories or mentions in personal diaries, which provide only fragmented glimpses into the network's true scope and influence. According to declassified Stasi files, even state intelligence apparatuses struggled to map the internal hierarchies of these groups with full accuracy. This inherent opacity forces a reliance on inference and pattern recognition, making the resulting historical narratives vulnerable to criticism from more traditional scholars who demand concrete, documentary proof, a standard nearly impossible to meet when dealing with organizations built on secrecy. This challenge of documenting secretive networks becomes particularly significant when examining how such connections shaped colonial governance structures across multiple continents. Our journey into the hidden corridors of power comes to an end. We have traced the threads of secret societies through centuries, uncovering Masonic symbols in plain sight and exploring their ties to American founding fathers and the French Revolution's hidden architects. The roles of presidents, British prime ministers, and European monarchs within these brotherhoods have been examined, Alongside revelations from Soviet intelligence files and NATO's hidden network, we have delved into Kennedy's unknown enemies, the unsolved European political murders, and central banking and corporate boardroom connections. Patterns of CIA Masonic recruitment and British intelligence connections have emerged from archival discoveries, despite academic research obstacles and press coverage suppression evidence. Lodge membership records and colonial policy connections reveal historical patterns in current events, even amidst anti-Masonic campaigns and the Catholic Church's documented opposition. Unanswered questions remain about contemporary political lodge connections. Subscribe to our channel to not miss new episodes. See you soon.